Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the second hour of News and Views right here on Salam Media. It is exactly 9:20 a.m. and we are going to be covering three political stories. We're going to be looking at the Section 89 panel of experts assessment deadline on Cyril Ramaphosa's issue looms closer. We're also going to be talking demography and population statistics, and that is that the total world population is estimated to have reached 8 billion people as of yesterday. But first up, we're going to be talking with Peter Gift Mutasa. He's the chairperson of Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition based in Zimbabwe. We are looking at the issue around a former Nigerian president, Obasanjo, blaming Zimbabwe for allegedly setting the wrong precedent of military takeovers in Africa. He goes on to refer to the ousting of former Zimbabwean leader, the late Robert Mugabe, and that was obviously the ousting from power in November 2017. So really this is all about unpacking 5 years since the 2017 Zimbabwean coup d'etat, which I'm not sure if Peter is going to agree it was a coup, or whether Mugabe actually realized that it was time for him to step down. There's still a bit of contention around that issue regarding the world outside of Zimbabwe. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Julia, and thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so let's look at the remarks and statements made by the former Nigerian president Obasanjo, blaming Zimbabwe for setting the wrong precedent as far as coups are concerned. Just before you respond to that question, as a Zimbabwean, how would you put the record straight? In 2017, would you see the change in government as a coup, or whether Robert Mugabe decided it is now time for me to step down, and in obviously meetings being, having lots of discussions with different political leaders and his own party as well, decided that it is time to step down?
Right. So it is either it is in the afternoon or it's at night. You can't have half. There's no half coup. It was a coup. We saw the military getting out of the barracks. We saw Mugabe under house arrest. Many people in the security sector died. Some had to cross over the borders. They were being hunted like animals. The whole country was on a logjam, and there is no any other description. This was a coup. We had a coup in 2017. But coming to President Obasanjo's view, I wish to differ with him seriously, and I think many Zimbabweans differ with him. What happened in Zimbabwe is not a reflection of failure by Zimbabweans or Zimbabwe, but is a failure by institutions, international governance institutions like Africa Union, where Mr. Obasanjo was in for a long time, like SADC, and also the United Nations. Mugabe had gone for 37 years, perpetuating with his regime serious human rights violations. Since the 80s, he killed over 20,000 people in Midlands and Matabeleland in a clear ethnic-based genocide. Mugabe had also perpetuated a lot of violence. Even in 2007, we witnessed serious political violence after he lost presidential elections. And the cries of and voices of Zimbabweans were all over. Zimbabweans were still talking, Zimbabwe was still protesting, even under serious threat from Mugabe regime. What we did so was an international community, African Union, SADC especially, who sided with Mugabe's regime at the expense of democracy, freedom, and human dignity of the Zimbabweans. So when naturally the military came out, naturally people supported it because Mugabe had violated their rights for many times, had mismanaged the economy. There was some hope that maybe things would change. But now, 5 years down the line, it's now clear that we took a wrong turn. So we differ with President Obasanjo. It is a failure of institutions that are supposed to guarantee human security in Africa, human security in SADC, and also that are supposed to guarantee democracy and democratic change of governance.
So 5 years after the coup in 2017, you are suggesting that that was the wrong turn taken by the Zimbabwean people. Do you believe that perhaps the country is ready for another coup? Or can there be some form of a very peaceful transition or time for a re-election? Where do the Zimbabweans stand here and now?
So from history, coups tend to beget other coups. So we can't discount that. But the most important aspect is that where people are not secure, where there is no human security, where people's economic livelihoods are not secured, and where there is no provision of public services, any such society is quite insecure. It is bound to have civil strife of some sort. So there are two things. The current regime has failed dismally. In fact, it has turned into a military dictatorship. It has suspended all citizens' rights and freedoms. So people can no longer express themselves openly. If you do, you are doing so at a great risk, like I'm doing here. People can no longer enjoy freedom of association. The regime is coming up with the draconian bills like the private voluntary organization bills that seeks to muzzle and to close civic space. The regime is also fighting anyone who seeks to exercise the freedom of to protest or freedom of assembly. So we have turned into a military dictatorship. There is an undeclared martial law that is running and that is operating in this country. It is not stated anywhere, but everyone knows. That's why people are self-censoring. That's why people are no longer protesting. That's why people are running away from this country. And because we are now under a military dictatorship. But what is also happened is that the military dictatorship has failed to manage the economy. It took an economy when inflation was around 2.97 in November 2017. The inflation went as high as 846 in 2020. And currently we have the highest inflation in the world at 268%. Even this figure is massaged, it's not the correct figure. We also have the highest interest rates in the world at 200%. And you can imagine what that means to the livelihoods of people and to the living conditions. Wages have been eroded seriously. The current minimum wage in this country is 25,000 local currency, which is less than 1,000 rands or less than 40 US dollars. And the current minimum wage for domestic workers is still pegged at 10,000 local currency, which is less than 15 US dollars and probably less than 300 US dollars. So people are suffering. Half of the population is in extreme poverty, and over 70% is food insecure. So the regime has also failed to manage the economy. But above all, the regime has also failed to provide public service. You go into our hospitals, the caricature of the past glory. We had the super hospital infrastructure that was left by the colonialists. That has been destroyed. You can't get painkillers in our hospitals. That's why people are flooding into Messina and into South Africa to get medical treatment. The ruling elites are not treated locally. They get treatment in China, in Europe, and everywhere around, including South Africa, because there's no equipment. There are no equipment in our hospitals. Doctors are there. They are frustrated. Nurses, radiographers, they are frustrated.
Okay.
A lot are
Peter,
leaving this country. We are facing massive brain drain, and many people
Peter,
are leaving this country.
let me come in there. You're painting a very, very grim picture. It is absolutely grim, deep, dark, and black, and absolutely frightening. Is that not suggestive of perhaps a possible coup broiling in the background? And if the military are in charge right now, who would overthrow the military? Do you have strong enough opposition parties? Are they strong enough to band together to overthrow the military? And I know by posing that question, and if this interview has to get leaked out in Zimbabwe, you are in serious trouble. But it is a question that needs to be asked.
So the first thing is that the challenges that we are talking about are not conclusive to suggest that there is a military coup that is brewing, but they are just
I'm asking the
symptomatic.
question, Peter, I asked the question, suggesting how bleak the picture is, would that not give rise to a coup? That's the question.
We had such a scenario during Mugabe, and it took 37 years or 30 years, 3 decades, until we had a coup. So in terms of a coup, it depends on the internal dynamics of ZANU-PF. And I think President Mnangagwa and his team are also shrewd political political players. He has probably also played his cards right to coup-proof his regime. As things stand, there's nothing that can quickly point to another coup. We know that there are frictions within the ruling party, but as to whether those frictions may lead to another coup, that is debatable. From my own view, I think the only sticking issue, President Mnangagwa has managed to make sure that he protects himself. The only sticking issue that may expose him to another coup is the fact that he has not handled a succession. ZANU-PF has not handled its succession clearly and openly and democratically. And definitely after its conference, it is clear that there are disgruntlements that are within. There's latent conflict that is brewing within the party. But whether that conflict can rise to a coup, it is not yet clear. There's no clear indications within what is happening in ZANU-PF that there will be another coup. And I also don't think it will be an easy straw for anyone who may want to have another coup in Zimbabwe. Because firstly, when the coup happened against Mugabe, everyone was fed up. Everyone, including the international community. So Mugabe had no support locally, regionally, and also internationally. Currently, the Mnangagwa regime has made friends. It has brought a projection that it is a legitimate government because it went through an election after the coup. So it is a different form with other coup governments that we have in West Africa, where they've not gone through an election. And that will play it difficult, to make it difficult for those who may want to have another coup. And the second aspect is Zimbabweans are now wiser. With Mugabe and coup against Mugabe, Zimbabweans stupidly followed the military strategy and the military propaganda and supported it wholeheartedly. I don't think another coup will be supported wholeheartedly. So this is why our hope should lie in a democratic, non-violent regime change, where we are looking at elections, where also we are looking at civil resistance, where we are looking at protests and civil resistance and all other constitutional means that are in our constitution of piling pressure on the regime to reform, or mounting pressure and put all our energy in the electoral processes to change the regime. So those are the two main options that I think are open for Zimbabweans. Another coup will be bloody and may also be disruptive.
I'm so sorry, but I'll have to end it there. We have run out of time. But thank you indeed for your thoughts on that issue. And that, of course, is you disagree with a former Nigerian President Obasanjo, who blames Zimbabwe for allegedly setting the wrong precedent for military takeovers in Africa. Thank you for putting the record straight there from your perspective and possibly the perspective of many other Zimbabweans. You go well, stay safe, and God bless.
Thank you. It has been my pleasure.
9:35 exactly. This is News and Views right here on Salam Media. Next on line is Diego Iturralde. He is with Stats South Africa. Demography and population statistics is his portfolio. We're going to be looking at the population explosion, not only here in Africa, but all around the world. And what does that mean for the world order per se? So please do stand by.